Robert F. Kennedy tweeted this out. He said, I just saw this video by Border Hawks News. By the way, Border Hawks, doesn't it sound like someone who kidnaps people at the border?
Yes.
That's what it sounds like. The crisis at the border is unsustainable, he says. Our communities are slashing education funding to accommodate illegal migrants. We've seen a record number of gotaways since Biden took office.
I'm Efrain Gonzalez, correspondent with Border Hawk News. This is how mass migrant crossings are carried out at Eagle Pass.
We followed this large group of migrants who left the only shelter that is open in Piedras Negras just at sunset. Most of these people do not know how to get to the river. However, through GPS, they obtain the exact location where forklift tractors raised the razor wire last October.
Did you see that? That was video of border agents they're raising the razor wire. They're using this thing that's border agents doing that. Maybe that's part of the test to see if they can become U.S. Capitol Security Police. Am I wrong? I think the ones that the Capitol Police that were there on January 6th have moved on to more lucrative work protecting our schools for now. I'm pretty sure. Here we go.
Raised the razor wire last October.
No saben el camino al río.
No, señor, no. Estamos con GPS lleno con el guía.
We accompanied this caravan that walked for an hour in the darkness to reach the crossing point. The migrants said they were angry that Mexican authorities sent them to cross into this dangerous area of the river at night.
¿Por qué migración hizo eso? De sacarnos de la casa de las monjas.
Why did Mexican, she says, why did Mexican immigration
de sacarnos de la casa de las monjas
take us out of the nun's house, a shelter, to cross the river, knowing that it is deep and there are many people carrying children?
Muchas personas que cargan niños.
There they are.
The crossings of these GPS-guided caravans have become much more frequent in Eagle Pass this November.
So that's the United States government allowing this to happen. And believe me, they're only doing it for the best of intentions. I mean, there's no way on earth this would be happening. The United States government would just be letting this happen to destabilize our economy and add to a prevailing sense that we need more authority to clamp down on all of us. There's no way. If that's what you think, then you've got to stop going to your news. You've got to stop getting your news from me. You got to stop going to your big news networks. Here's a little bit more of it, by the way.
This huge caravan of around 300 migrants crossed into Eagle Pass thanks to Border Patrol agents lifting the barbed wire.
That's really happening. So let me bring in the fellas. What do you make of this? Oh, it seems like at the same time that Joe Biden is trying to finish. It seems like he's kind of superficially trying to finish Trump's border wall. At the same time, there's obviously an open border policy, right? What do you make of this?
Well, I'll toss to my co-host by invoking a quote that he often recites, and I think I finally memorized it correctly. There are no contradictions. When you think you found a contradiction, check your premises, right?
Very good. You nailed it.
Nailed
it. That is von Clausewitz. Yes, this is something that I've long felt the left misses the boat. It's one of those areas where they get so caught up in their identity politics that they're not able to address some of the realities of these issues. For one thing, because they usually don't have the kinds of jobs that are going to be impacted by letting millions of illegal immigrants into the country. I agree with you, Jimmy. I think it is to destabilize the economy. I think it's to depress wages. Don't tell me about how putting millions of desperate people into the economy does not depress wages. It doesn't depress wages for your average PMC who calls it racism when you make a statement like that. But as somebody who was in a job that got killed by illegal immigrants taking the job, I've experienced it myself. Yes, it does happen. I've known a lot of people in construction.
What job was that? You worked on Jimmy Kimmel's show?
I used to drive a horse and carriage, believe it or not.
Oh, and, really? Well, that's torture for the horses anyway, but go ahead.
And they started hiring people illegally who had student visas that were not supposed to be qualified even to be licensed, much less to have those jobs. And it was a great job until that. It depressed the wages. It made it much harder to get work. You didn't have as much leverage with the owners because there were 10 people waiting behind you to take your job. So, and a lot of my friends were in construction. And yeah, sure, they got killed by people coming in who were willing to do jobs for a third of what they would do the job for, and they just couldn't compete with that. But the kinds of people who will call you a racist for that usually are not in touch with that side of life. They're not coming from those industries. They don't know anybody in industries who would be affected by this. And here in New York City, you may have heard, they just announced budget cuts because they're sending immigrants here. And we have a shelter law that anyone who needs shelter must be provided shelter by law. So as they send these immigrants here, they can't be left on the street. So they're having to rent all of these hotel rooms. And the effect of this is that a lot of people who are veterans who need housing are not able to get these services because they're going to migrants. Now, this is not in any way to say bad migrants. In the end, it's always the same story. It's the owners and the capitalist class pitting desperate people against each other for scraps while they ride off with the money. But the left needs to find a position that is not anyone who's against this is a racist. That is not a position. And frankly, whether sure, it's politically convenient. I consider sending the migrants to northern cities one of the most brilliant political trolls in history. And I say that as a New Yorker because, sure, people love to sit in these non-border cities, these very blue non-border cities, and say, look at these racists. Look at these racists complaining about people coming over the border. The second they started to send them to places like New York, Chicago, D.C., we can't handle all of these migrants. Now, if somebody in El Paso said that, you'd call them a racist, right?
Yep.
And they've been saying this for decades.
I've seen African Americans, people of color in Chicago, my home city. I've seen videos of them screaming at their aldermen, their elected city councilmen, saying, where the hell are you getting all this money for these immigrants when we've been wanting you to do something for us for years? You've done shit for us, and all of a sudden you pull money out of your ass to help these people who aren't even citizens here, you motherfuckers. And they've got a case. They've got 100% good case, and it just goes to show you that the people, again, the billionaire class that is running this country wants chaos. They want that.
Right.
They want you pitted against immigrants. They want immigrants pitted against people of color. They want workers against workers. They want you to think your enemy is your neighbor and not the enemy that is creating the conditions that make those migrants desperate enough to come here. And then second enough, that the oligarchs that keep the border open. It's crazy that we have an open border. This is obviously being done to do just what I said, to suppress wages because it's a tight labor market. And Joe Biden is being told by his billionaire handlers, you keep that fucking border open until we can suppress these wages, because there's been strikes. There's been lots of wildcat strikes. There's been a union that got formed on Staten Island at Amazon. They don't want that shit happening. We just had a union win for the UAW. They can't have this. They can't can't abide by this. And so that's why that border is wide open. And if you don't think that's why the border is wide open, you're a chump and a sucker of the billionaire class, and you're being manipulated by professional managerial class language of racism, and you're mean to immigrants. The meanest thing to immigrant is that the United States policy creates these people who are desperate enough to come here, right? So maybe if we stopped overthrowing their fucking governments and we stopped implementing the drug war, maybe they wouldn't want to come here and they wouldn't be so desperate in the first place. By the way, NAFTA cut the legs out from underneath rural farmers in Mexico. And turned it over to big agribusiness, right? So these are the policies of the billionaire class that is creating this crisis. And then, of course, you turn on your neighbor, you turn on someone lower on the economic ladder than you, like an immigrant.
Right.
Yeah, that's the untold part of NAFTA. You know, we always hear about how it decimated the working class here. It decimated the Mexican working class also.
Right.
Yes. Here's what Mayorkas had to say. The guy who's in charge of was he in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, or was he in charge of the Border Patrol? He's in charge of something like that. Here we go.
Also doesn't address the other sort of elephant in the room, which is dealing with the undocumented immigrants who are already here in the nation. And I know it's been a political football as to trying to figure out the best way to address that. But I'm going to ask you, what is the best way to address that from your perspective?
The answer is quite clear and quite straightforward, and we've been waiting for it.
And he's not going to tell you what it is. Just spoiler alert, he's not going to tell you what the answer is, even though it's straightforward and it's quite clear. Let's see. Is he going to tell us what it is?
For about 30 years, and that is to fix a system that everyone agrees is fundamental.
So the answer is to fix the system. That's his answer. That's literally,
broken, and we need congressional action, both for the lawful pathways that really need to be more robust in statute, and for the 12 million people who are here in the United States who have been contributing so fundamentally to our country's well-being. They're our neighbors, our friends, our fellow congregants. They provide our frontline workers. We need to do something, and I am hopeful and remain hopeful that Congress will do it. The president, on his first day in office, presented Congress with a proposal.
What is that proposal? He never says it. What is the proposal? What is this? It's quite clear we have to do something for these people. He doesn't say, first of all, he says the 12 million people who are here illegal, they're fantastic. We love them. Can't make them, can't get rid of their illegal status fast enough. Why is that, you think? Because they want to suppress the wages. Again, I'm not demonizing immigrants who are here, but that's what he's saying. We got to make 12 million new citizens like that. That's really what he's saying. And he won't tell you what the answer to this is, except keep bringing them in and making them citizens. Isn't that what he's saying?
Well, AOC had a press conference the other day in New York where they were screaming at her.
I saw that.
Protesters were screaming at her. And she's saying we need to give them work visas.
Get them work visas. No, that is not what your constituency wants. Your constituency wants jobs for themselves first.
Yes. Well, this is why this is so empowering to the right wing. And this is not just happening here. We never got around to covering it. I wanted to cover, they just had those riots in Ireland this week.
Yeah, that's right.
And of course, they branded it a right-wing riot. Okay, so I know a lot of people on the left are very, very uncomfortable with conversations like this. But okay, so I'm going to let you in on something. No matter what culture it is, no matter what society it is, doesn't matter what it is. This is not particular to white people. If you bring in a bunch of people from outside, an overwhelming number, to the degree that the culture of the people who are from there is being completely swamped and overwhelmed by people that are so numerous they can't really be assimilated into the civilization, to the point that Muhammad is the number one name in Galway today, in Ireland. Now, I know the same liberals who think it's horrible to talk about that would see the problem immediately if a bunch of Americans dropped down in the middle of Shanghai and the number one name became Jim. In Shanghai, you'd see the problem right away. And when the Chinese got angry about it, you'd be very sympathetic to it, right? This is human nature. If you think that's bad, all right, well, okay. And now what? Now what? Because when you only treat these questions as questions of racial animus, you empower the right wing. You are telling these people, go vote for the most crazy, right-wing, racist, anti-immigrant person you can find, because the alternative are people who are going to call you racist for having any concerns like this.
Keaton, anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, you just can't square capitalism with a problem like this. You know, when you have a Democratic Party dominated by neoliberal orthodoxy, there is no way to make a policy like this make sense. And of course, they revert to calling people racist who give them a hard time about it because it's the only thing they can do, because they can't address the economic conditions, not only in this country, but Jimmy, as you said earlier, of the countries that these people are fleeing. Right. So if there's no answer for any of that, then the only answer is to maintain a status quo like we have now and call anybody who doesn't like it a racist for not liking it. Just browbeat whoever makes too much noise about it, because the material reality of the situation is beyond the control of anybody who is not willing to, impose a more structural reform on the system itself.
Right. And that's the counterpart. We've created conditions in the Middle East that are so horrific that, of course, most people don't want to leave their homeland. Very few people, when I go back home to Flushing, I see people working the cash registers that I was in grade school with. Like, most people don't want to leave where they're from if they don't have to. Right. These people are not going into Europe. They're not coming here from Mexico, in our case, because they want to leave everything they've known. They're desperate, and our foreign policy has made it desperate. I don't in any way want to give the impression these bad people, whether it's Muslims in Europe or whether it's Latin Americans and Mexicans here, but the left has got to find an answer to people who are hurt by these policies other than you're a racist.
I would say you have to close the border. That would be the first thing you do. You have to, I think Trump actually said if you can't control your border, you don't have a country. I mean, right. Imagine if that was the border between Palestine and Israel. Did you think they would fucking stand for that?
Well, this is why that critique of globalism has legs, because to globalists like this, countries are just inconvenient lines on a map that dictate where and how they can do business. Right. They don't actually believe in countries or sovereignty. The world is just one giant marketplace, according to the neoliberal order. Countries are inconvenient. Countries are annoying. That's why Donald Trump's nationalist appeals are successful, because, under neoliberalism, you get a lot of flowery language about what America is. It's an idea. It's a hope. It's an aspiration. Trump views America much more simply as a place, as a land with people in it, right? And those people are interested in their resources, their money, their culture, their language. I'm not saying that there's not a certain underbelly to that, but that appeal makes sense to people because it is actually based in a sort of analog reality. It's not poetry. It's not conceptual. Whereas the neoliberal appeal is all conceptual because the world is just a big strip mall in their eyes. And the more sort of heterogeneous, the better, because the more boundaries bleed into each other, the easier it is for them to say, well, this is just all a giant marketplace and we can do business wherever we want. That's their utopia. And countries and languages and borders and cultures get in the way of that. They complicate that.
It's like
as Ned Beatty said,
I was just going to say that. We were going exactly the same place.
Go ahead.
What'd you say?
Well, that's like the Ned Beatty speech in Network, where he says,
"All right,
you're an old man who thinks in terms of nations and ideologies and borders."
Right.
There are no countries. There are only companies and the international transfer of dollars.
Right.
And you have upset that system, and you will atone. Gentlemen,
when I do my production, you're at the front of the line for the Ned Beatty part, Jimmy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on. Everybody should check out Due Dissidence. Their show is on all the platforms. Also, are you on Substack still?
We are still on Substack. Yeah, we're starting to write articles again now that people are bothering to read them. So, we're on Substack as well.
Reading is so boring. But anyway.
It's so last century.
It is so last century. But Russ will be here January 8th or through the 15th, filling in for me while I take a much-needed vacation in honor of my father's death. And I hopefully Keaton will be sitting in for some of those shows while he's here.
Absolutely.
Because God knows Russ can't do it on his own.
No. I need my wingman.
Okay. We're doing live comedy shows in Oxnard, California, Venice, California, Palmdale, California, Omaha, Nebraska, Des Moines, Milwaukee, Lansing, Michigan, Bend, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, and Boston. Plus, we're going to put a date in Edmonton, Canada, plus Vancouver. See ya. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.